Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, Chapter 7, Halacha 2. This is part 2 of the shiur. If you're following along in the art scroll, we're on 58b1. The shiur is dedicated to the speedy recovery of Aaron Yudaleib ben Edna, my son. So, yesterday we were talking about the terebinth, the pistachio, and the thorn bush. And we were talking about the shoots. Now, the shoots, as we discovered yesterday, are not subject to Beur. But this Mishnah points out that the leaves are subject to Beur. Now, keep in mind, this has been a theme all throughout Sheviis. Plants can be divided up into multiple parts. Parts of plants can have one halacha, another part of a plant can have another halacha. And this is going to be what's coming up here. But there's a twist, there's a nuance. And the nuance that we're going to be getting into here is going to be a case where what happens if you have these shoots. You know, we have shoots today in cuisine, bamboo shoots. Bamboo shoots are commonly found in Chinese cooking. And so if you left them alone, they would become woody and become part of a branch or something like that. It would be indistinguishable from the rest of the tree, and it's always going to be there throughout the winter. So if it's always going to be there, it's not going to be subject to Beur. But on these plants, the leaves are going to fall off, and these leaves are subject to Beur. Now, what are they doing with the leaves back in the ancient world for things like this? They can be soaking them in salt water or vinegar to preserve them. And we know that from modern Mediterranean cuisine that we have today, they'll cure the grape leaves in vinegar and they'll wrap them up in rice. Now, by the way, the grape leaves, since they fall off the plant, that would be subject to Beur as well. So if you have these grape leaves, or what we're going to be covering, the leaves of the terebinth, pistachio, or thorn bush, you're going to have it preserved in the salt water or the vinegar. When the time of Beur comes, you're going to have to put it out for Beur. You're not going to be able to keep it. So the question's going to come up now with what happens when you have these shoots. Now, these shoots are not subject to Beur. And then you have the leaves, and these are going to be soaked together in this liquid. Now, they're going to have maybe two different kinds of flavors. You know, we know that plants, there are parts of plants that will have different flavors and even different uses. I know that in Chinese cooking, the scallions are basically divided into two different uses of the plant. You have one use for the white part of the scallion, and then the green parts of the leaves are used differently in Chinese cooking. Also in Japanese cooking as well. They're treated differently, even though, you know, it's only a few inches away from each other. So they actually are treated differently because they have different flavors, and not only the texture is going to be different, but the taste is going to be different as well, and so they're going to use them differently. We're going to come up with something similar. We're having a case where these shoots are going to have a different taste than the leaves, even though it's coming from the same plant. And then what's going to happen is they're going to be putting it into this liquid, and they're going to impart flavor to one another. Now, the wrinkle here, the twist here, is that this is coming from the same plant, and the different parts have different flavors, and now it's being cured. And what's going to happen when you have something that's not subject to Beur, and it's being combined together to soak with something that is subject to Beur? Now, yes, this is from the same plant, and yes, this is going to be something where what happens when taste comes in. What is going to be the status of taste? So the Gemara says, regarding leaves of these species which are subject to Beur, that were soaked together with the shoots of these species which are not subject to Beur, 3 baraisas were taught. And there are teachers of baraisas who teach, says this Gemara, both these leaves and those shoots are subject to Beur. So the Tana who teaches this is going to hold that since the shoots are soaked with the leaves, and that the leaves are going to be subject to Beur, basically the shoots are now going to be obligated in Beur. Now, we were covering this before. What happens if you make an exchange where you have something that does not have a use? For instance, there's no use for lighting wine, right? You can't use wine for candles. You can't use wine for lighting. It's only for drinking. And then what happens if you make an exchange with another product of Sheviis? Let's say both have Sheviis, and one is going to be olive oil. You just made a barter. You made a trade. Now, what's going to happen is the olive oil, you can use it for your salad, but you can also use it for your candles. And what's going to happen is the stringencies of one is going to be applied to the other. So what's going to happen is now when you have this wine, you traded it away for the olive oil. And now this wine that you have in your possession, you're not allowed to light it. You're not allowed to, you have all these restrictions to it. So, and vice versa, right? So the guy who gets back the olive oil, right? He had the wine, no problem, right? And now he traded it away for the olive oil. Well, now he's not allowed to light the olive oil anymore. Why? Because he wasn't allowed to light with the wine, right? You're not allowed to use wine in that way. And now that he got this from the exchange, now it has all the astringencies of the wine. So now he can't light and use it as olive oil for lighting a candle. He's not allowed to do it because of the strictures of the wine. And so according to this Tana, it's a similar kind of idea. You have the shoots that were not subject to Beur, and then they're soaked together with the leaves and they're pickled together, and the leaves are subject to Beur. And now since you've combined it, the shoots are now going to get the stringencies of the leaf. So now even the woody parts of these shoots, which were not subject to Beur, are going to be obligated in Beur. That's going to be the idea of that baraisa. Then there's another baraisa, and the Gemara says, and there are teachers of baraisas who teach both these leaves and those shoots are not subject to Beur. So this Tana is basically saying that since the leaves were soaked with the shoots, and those shoots are exempt from Beur, then even the leaves are going to become exempt from Beur. This is the Makel opinion here. And then there are the teachers of the Brisas who teach, and this is the third one, it says the leaves are subject to Beur and the shoots are not subject to Beur. So this Tana is holding that each of these items is going to hold the previous state that it had, and even though they're all soaked together, it's gonna still retain the old status that it had. So basically, in this case, the leaves and the shoots are soaked together, and then the shoots are going to still not be obligated to Beur, even though they're soaked together, and then the leaves are going to be subject to Beur. But we're going to get a qualification and a clarification for how this all works. Now, the Gemara that's coming up is going to explain that these three baraisas are going to show the opinions of three different Tanaim, and these views are actually going to be recorded in chapter 9. Halacha 4 coming up, so we didn't get there yet. But the Mishnah over there in 9.4 in Sheviis is talking about how the law of Beur is going to apply in a case where someone is going to pickle three different types of vegetables in the Sheviis year in a single barrel. And so you find that today sometimes. People will make elaborate pickles and they'll put lots and lots of different kinds of vegetables into a saltwater solution, and it can be quite good. So I myself actually will make pickles in my house with cucumbers, with fennel, and with garlic. And so that's three different vegetables right there. So we have these three opinions, right? So one is going to be Rabbi Eliezer, and he's going to rule stringently because he's a student of Bet Shammai, so he's going to rule stringently. And he's basically going to be saying that all three vegetables are going to be subject to Beur as soon as the Beur deadline comes for the first one. So in other words, he's going to be saying that the imparted flavor is going to go onto the other things. And so since you have a mixture and the imparted flavor is going on to all the other things, and as soon as the first one is no longer available in the field, that you have to remove all three vegetables. Now, I can tell you in the pickles that I make that the cucumbers do absorb the flavor of the garlic and the fennel. And I can tell you also that if you just eat the pieces of fennel, it does taste like garlic and it does taste like cucumbers as well as the fennel. So you have a blending. But the trick over there, the idea over there, it's not a trick, but the deep point there is that we're trying to get, well, does taste have substance? Is that going to be counted as a real thing or not? That's going to be the underlying idea. Now, the other one is going to be the lenient baraisa, and that's going to also be reflected in 9.4. That's going to be Rabbi Yeshua, and he's going to be holding leniently that none of the vegetables is subject to Beur until the Beur deadline for the last one arrives. So that's a little bit different opinion about, what is taste going to be? What is the status of flavor and taste? Is that going to be like a real substance? And it could be like, really arguing that, well, you're putting out the last one because the taste of the first and second one doesn't matter. And, this vegetable that you have, this last one out, let's say it's the fennel in my case, the last one to leave the field, you could say that, the fennel is out and you have fennel there in the jar and you better put out all of it. So that could be one way to look at it. And also, you would say that it's a mixture. So that's going to be the most lenient opinion. Then you have Rabban Gamliel. He's going to hold that each vegetable remains subject to its own Beur deadline in 9.4. And so whatever you were pickling, you would basically have whenever something goes out of the field, you would put it out. So this is really bypassing the whole flavor thing altogether, and whether the flavor has substance. And basically what this is saying is, there you have a cucumber and the cucumbers are no longer in the field, go put it out. And then you say, yeah, but I have the taste of the fennel in here. I can taste the fennel in my cucumber and in my pickled cucumber. And, surely the flavor of the fennel, which is the last one to leave the field, surely that must change the status of it, right? And he says, no, it's still a cucumber and the taste doesn't matter. It's not substantial. So take the cucumber and put it out. And now you would say, yeah, but now I have garlic and fennel, and the garlic, has the flavor of the fennel in it. And he would say, look, the flavor of the fennel is not a substance. It's not its own thing. And there you have garlic. So take the garlic and put it out for Beur. And finally, he would say on the fennel, now the fennel has come and put it out. So that's going to be the idea. Now, in this dispute, the Gemara is going to explain the three baraisas regarding the leaves and the shoots that we have over here for the terebinth, the pistachio, and the thorn bush that are all soaked together. So these are going to be the three opinions. This is outlined. I know this because this is a Mishnah. This is in 9.4 in Sheviis. So the Gemara says that the one who says that both the leaves and the shoots are subject to Beur follows the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. And basically he has the strict opinion here. He's saying that when vegetables are going to be soaked together with different vegetables that have different Beur deadlines, he's going to basically be saying the one with the last deadline is going to be subject to the earlier deadline because it absorbs the flavor of the other vegetable. And he's saying that this would basically be the same case with the shoots as well. And basically, he's basically holding that flavor is like a substance. So in the case of the terebinth, pistachio, thorn bush, where you're having the leaves that taste one way and the shoots that taste another way, even though one is subject to Beur and one is not, because the flavor gets absorbed into the one that is not subject to Beur, it now has substance, right? And so effectively, this now has a change in halachic status according to Rabbi Eliezer, because he's saying now, since the substance has some sort of weight, that this flavor is like a substance, and it's influencing the other thing, the shoot that is not subject to Beur, to get that flavor. Now it's going to be subject to Beur because inside of it has this taste of the leaf that is subject to Beur. That's the idea. Now in the second case, it says that the one who says that both the leaves and the shoots are not subject to Beur follows the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. Now, this is going to be the very lenient opinion, and this is basically going to be saying that you have a vegetable, it's going to be soaked with another vegetable, and they have different Beur deadlines. Or, in this case, you're going to have one that has a Beur deadline and one that doesn't. And basically what Rabbi Yeshua is saying, he's saying that as long as, there's part of the vegetable, and even if it only absorbed the flavor, it is not yet, it's not yet reached the Beur deadline, and the entire vegetable remains exempt from Beur because part of it is still available in the field in this case. So the idea here is that when they're soaked together, the leaves, which were originally subject to Beur, becomes exempt from Beur by virtue of the shoot flavor that's absorbed into it. So he holds that the flavor does also become a substance, okay? And he's basically saying that, look, these shoots are available all year, and the animals can go graze on them after the winter. So you don't have to put these shoots out. And now the flavor of the shoot has gone into the leaf. So now it's acquired this flavor in the leaf. And so over here, you don't need to put out the shoot because it's not subject to Beur. And over here on the leaf, when the leaves are all fallen off, it has the flavor in this pickling compound, has the flavor of the shoot in it, and the shoot is not subject to Beur. And he's basically holding that since the shoot flavor is absorbed into the leaf, you don't have to put it out for Beur. And then you have this third opinion. This is going to be Rabban Gamliel's opinion, and the Gemara reads, and the one who says that the leaves are subject to Beur and the shoots are not subject to Beur, this is going to follow the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. Now, the idea here, says Mara Fulda, is that in regards to Beur, we're focusing only on the essence of the product, and we're not concerned with the flavor that's absorbed at all. So, in Rabban Gamliel's opinion, he's basically saying that flavor has no substance. So he's saying this, in my case, of these cucumber pickles that I make, which I, by the way, do in a 2.5% salt solution. It's just water and 2.5% salt, and you just put in the cucumbers, and you put in whatever spices you want, and the garlic, and the fennel, the shumir, and then you let it pickle in the fridge for 10 days or a week, and it's great. But you will taste that different the flavors all mixed together. So that garlic flavor is in that cucumber pickle. That fennel flavor is in that cucumber pickle. And so he's saying that the flavor doesn't matter. Okay, cucumbers are the first one to leave the field. They will rot if you leave them too long in the field. And basically, he'll say, so what? So what if you have garlic taste in the pickle? And so what if garlic's still in the field of this cucumber pickle? This is a cucumber, and the substance has the substance. The flavor is not a substance, he would say. So that's the three arguments. Now, the Mishnah is going to give an opinion that balsam has Sheviis sanctity. Okay, so the balsam, by the way, is going to be used for the spices, for the incense, for the altar. Right? This is one of the 11 spices. So, you could, wonder, well, in a deeper point, are the spices for, the ketoret, isn't that going to have Sheviis sanctity? Is that going to have some sort of status? And of course, you always have a case where you have a taseh outdoing a lo taseh, right? So you shall do versus you shall not do. And in the temple, it argues and it says, you shall do, you shall light these incenses. So if it turns out to be where things that just are used for smell are going to have Sheviis sanctity. And by the way, that's a maloket. There are Tanaim who hold that things that are only going to be used for smell and not consumption will still have Sheviis sanctity. That's not a unanimous opinion, and that's a disputed opinion. But there are Tanaim who hold that, and then so you would say, well, according to those Tanaim, how can you use the incense? And they would come back, and everybody would come back and agree and say, because you're required to light it, and yes, I know that on Sheviis sanctity products, you're not allowed to destroy them, you're not allowed to burn them, but since you're commanded to go and do this with a positive commandment, that's how it happens. That's how you do it. So it's like the case of having a circumcision on Shabbat. On Shabbat, you're not supposed to carry tools. You're not supposed to, finish a product, so to speak. And, what is finishing for a Jew on the form of a Jew is Brit Milah for a male Jew. And so that's striking the final blow. That's the finishing touch for the person, for the Jew, for the body of the human being. And so you would say that, how can you do circumcision on Shabbat? And then the answer comes about, well, it's the commandment of doing it, a positive commandment outweighs the negative commandment. And so the same case would happen here. Now, the Gemara is going to be talking about Sheviis sanctity for balsam, and that's going to be interesting because that can be used just as a spice, just to smell. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon says that balsam in this Mishnah does not have Sheviis sanctity because it is not a fruit. He's holding that fruits are going to be subject to Sheviis. So the Gemara is going to discuss the dispute. When you're saying a fruit, right, the shoots are also not a fruit. We're talking about things that are, have potential to be eaten. So the Gemara is going to talk about this dispute, and Rabbi Pettis says in the name of Rabbi Yossi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon's ruling accords with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, and we learned in a Mishnah over there in the tractate in Orlah, is going to be Orlah 1.7. And by the way, I try to finish the Bavli Shas and Yerushalmi Shas every year, and I find chapter 1 in Orlah to be the hardest chapter in the Shas. It is really hard. Anyway, it's really, really hard. Chapter 1, chapter 2 are really difficult for me. Anyway, so Rabbi Eliezer over there is saying that if someone curdles milk with the sap of Orlah, the cheese is forbidden. So this comes up in a few places in the Shas. This also comes up with a case over there about the Orlah on figs. And so if you have a fig that is still subject to Orlah and the sap is used to make cheese, then over there in Orlah, in Masechet Orlah, in the Gemara over there, it's talking about how the cheese is going to be forbidden as Orlah produce. Very interesting. So we're going to get a similar kind of thing going on over here. So over here, Rabbi Yeshua says in this Gemara, I heard a tradition that if one curdles milk with the sap of the leaves of an Orlah tree, or with the sap of the trunk or branches of an Orlah tree, the cheese is permitted. But if one curdles milk with the sap of the unripe figs of an Orlah tree, the cheese is forbidden. And that's basically going to be because it is considered a fruit. In other words, that this is basically going to be saying, yes, it's an unripe fig, and that's going to be a fruit. And the fruit is going to turn, in the halacha, this curdled milk and cheese that comes from it into a fruit, because the residue is still going to be there. So the idea in Rabbi Shimon's ruling in this Mishnah for balsam, which is going to be the tree sap. There's a debate on exactly which tree the balsam is. There's some opinion that the balsam is a type of tree that exists in the Saudi Arabian desert, which, by the way, is not too far from Israel. And as we know, the Ishmaelites, are bringing caravans all over the place, and we know that with the story of Joseph. Anyway, so the question is, with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's ruling in the Mishnah, right? He's basically saying that, look, this is not a fruit. This is a resin. And over there in Orlah, if you take the milky sap from the leaves of an Orlah fig tree and you put that in to curdle the milk, okay, that's going to be permitted. Okay, it's not a fruit. And because of that, you would say the only problem comes when you're taking the fruit itself and curdling the cheese with the Orlah fruit itself. And he's basically saying that over here too, that the balsam tree sap is not a fruit. And so because of it, it's not going to have Sheviis sanctity. And it's not going to be like the same as a fruit. Okay? And that's going to basically be fitting in with Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. It's basically Rabbi Yeshua's opinion, but over here for balsam. And basically the idea over there in Rabbi Yeshua's opinion is also basically going to be that, if you got sap from trunks, or you got it from the branches, that is not going to be subject to the law of Orlah. Why? Because it's not a fruit. Now, this comes into play when you're dealing with maple syrup, for example. You can use maple syrup for all sorts of things. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, he's saying that all sap is subject to the law of Orlah. And because it's subject to the law of Orlah, Rabbi Eliezer is saying that it's also going to be subject to the law of Sheviis. So over here, he would say, very nice that the balsam, comes from the trunk. But Rabbi Eliezer is saying not only is the balsam going to be subject to, Orlah and Sheviis sanctity, but so is your maple syrup. And by the way, it's not just the fruit. This balsam is going to be as well. And so it's going to be subject to Sheviis and Orlah. And basically that's going to be the idea over there. Now, this assertion gets rejected. And Rabbi Zera says to Rabbi Pettis, since you say that Rabbi Shimon's ruling accords with the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, it follows that, just as you say over there, in the context of the Mishnah that we're talking about in Orlah, that the halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua. This, by the way, it can also be found in the Bavli Anita 8a, and this is a ruling that is going to be by Rabbi Pettis' father. So, he has a tradition. Rabbi Pettis has a tradition that his father had, continuing back. And Rabbi Zera is continuing in this mission. He says that the halacha, you're saying that the halacha follows Rabbi Yeshua. And so he's saying that you must say here in our Mishnah, the halacha follows Rabbi Shimon. So he's saying over there in Orlah, if you're saying in Orlah that, the sap is not a fruit and it's going to be like Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. And by the way, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's opinion is, ergo, just like Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. Rabbi Zera is saying to Rabbi Pettis, over here, you have to say that the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai with regards to the balsam. But that's not what the Tanna Kama say. And he knows, Rabbi Zera knows that Rabbi Pettis is not going to rule that way with the balsam. He's going to rule with the Tanna Kama. So the idea here is that there has to be some difference between this Mishnah and that Mishnah. In other words, that you can't just copy on Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's ruling and say it has the same logic as over there in Rabbi Yeshua. There's something different. And part of the idea in trying to learn Gemara is that you want to focus, you really want to spend a lot of focus and make little check marks in your mind and put little red flags up whenever you're seeing a contrast between different opinions that look to be contradictory or look to be very similar but actually are not similar, that there's actually a difference between different Mishnahs. And that's part of the depth of learning Gemara, is that, you know, if you're toiling to try to understand the differences between these subtleties, right? So if this were really the case of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were following Rabbi Yeshua on it, and the halacha over there in Orla is going to be Rabbi Yeshua. That's going to be the halacha over there. So you'd say, why do you need this Mishnah at all? You would just leave it out and you would just refer somebody over to Orla. So really what Rabbi Zera is pointing out is that he's saying that, look, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's ruling is not connected with Rabbi Yeshua's ruling, and that they're actually different, and these are different subjects that are not actually linked together. Okay, so in fact, Rebbe's putting this in here as a necessary Mishnah because these ideas between Orla over there and Sheviis over here are not linked, and that's why it needs a Mishnah. If they were linked and it was like, okay, well, you know, the sap is the sap, and, you know, the fruit is the fruit, and that's the halacha, and it's, you know, it's going to be linked, then you wouldn't need this Mishnah at all, because basically you would say it's just like in Orla, and that's that. But these are not linked. These are different. And so that's why you need this. Now, the Gemara is going to explain Rabbi Zera's opinion and why this opinion by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is not linked with Rabbi Yeshua. So he's basically pointing out, don't read it that way. That's not a linked opinion. Okay, this has to be a Mishnah on its own, and there's a deeper point here why Orla and Sheviis are different. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yonah says, why are all the growths, this is going to be the sap, the same? And over here, they're talking about, you know, resins, and this is going to be an idea that, by the way, also comes up with a debate between resin in a debate between Hillel, Bet Hillel, or Hillel the Elder, and Shammai, and then later Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai on when you're going to have, you know, Tu B'Shvat. So it all has to do with the resin. So Rabbi Yonah says, why are all the growths and the sap the same? And the balsam tree, which is going to be the subject of this Mishnah, is going to be subordinate to its sap. In other words, the tree over there and the sap, you know, when you look at this tree as a whole, what is the primary product, right? The primary product of this kind of tree that quite possibly could be located in the Arabian desert over there. Okay, this is going to be the reason that the Tana Kama is going to be basically ruling that the sap has Sheviis sanctity. You see that? In other words, when you have these balsam trees, okay, these are going to be grown for the sap. You don't care about any fruit or leaves or shoots coming out of it. You only want one thing out of it. You want the sap. And the idea here is that this sap is basically going to be treated as fruit. Okay, this is not just maple syrup you're getting here. Okay, this is not just something for your pancakes that, you know, where you're looking at it where it's like, oh, you know, it's like wood extract, right? It's not wood extract. Okay, this is the product. All right, and the idea is that because this is the product for this tree that you're planting, which, by the way, you might be planting it in an orchard, right? We were covering in chapter 1 of Sheviis on the orchard here. So you might be setting up a whole orchard. The only part of the tree that you want in this orchard, the only thing that's productive out of it, the only reason that you pay any attention to these trees and prune them and do whatever you do to keep them and maintain them, is because you want the sap out of them. And that's basically going to make it subject to the laws of Sheviis. And it's also going to give it, where it's going to be subject to the law of Orlah as well, because this is going to be the thing that you want. That's going to be the idea on what Rabbi Zera is going to be getting at. And this is what Rabbi Yonah is pointing at. So the idea is that, because this is the primary product, this is why the Tanna Kama are saying that the sap has Sheviis sanctity. Now, the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, a fruit tree, which is subject to the Mishnah or law, is not subordinate to its sap. So, if you have a fruit tree like a fig tree, okay, and that's the subject of the Mishnah over there in Orlah, the idea is that, the fruit is the primary product, okay? You're not growing a fig tree because you want the sap. You're growing the fig tree because you want the figs, and the primary product is going to be the fig. And the idea over here, what makes the Mishnah over here with Shimon Bar Yochai and the Mishnah over there in Orlah with Rabbi Yeshua is going to be that over there, the primary thing that you want is the fig itself, the fruit, okay? You don't want the sap, okay? So if somebody took the sap, it's like a back of the hand thing, right? That's not the primary product of the tree. It's not why you're putting in all, an orchard and you're dedicating space to fill it with this kind of tree and you're watering it and you're worrying about, pests and you're worrying about spacing and all the things that you have to worry about for the halacha of an orchard that we cover in chapter 1 over here. Why are you doing it? You're not doing it for the sap of a fig tree. You're not doing it for the leaves. You don't care about that. You only care about the figs. And that's why over there, it's going to be the figs that curdle the cheese and it becomes like a fruit. And so if you did it with the sap, which is not the primary product over there, and you curdled the cheese to make the cheese with the sap of the fig tree, it's going to be a case where that's going to be the not the primary product, and so it's not going to be subject to Orlah. But over here, the primary product is going to be the balsam itself. That's going to be the thing that you care about. So over there in Orlah, when you're seeing this debate between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, it's not linked to the dispute here between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Tanna Kama. And basically, this is talking about two different things. That's why this needs its own Mishnah. Okay, because what this is trying to point out is it's trying to say, hey, when you're looking at a tree, you need to look, what is the primary product of the tree? If you're off in Canada and you're growing trees, maple trees, and your desire there is the maple syrup, well, that becomes your primary product. You don't care about the other things that come with a maple tree. You're not trying to pickle the leaves or something like that. That's not what it's there for. It's there for the maple syrup. That's what you want. So that's going to have that's how you have to start to look at the plants. Again, these plants have different parts. And so we've been covering that. And that's why this is in chapter 7, halacha 2. And, we covered that in chapter 7, halacha 1, where, plants will have different parts, like the loof. The loof will have the leaves, which will have one halachic status, and then the bulb will have another halachic status for Beur. So the idea that Rabbi Yonah is trying to point out is this distinction between these two disputes, this point of difference between these two different Mishnahs, okay? And, one of the things to point out is what would happen if you had the Mishnah over here and the Mishnah over there both talking about the fig tree, okay? Well, you wouldn't be able to get an idea that there's a difference in the ruling, because you would say over here, well, the primary product is going to be the fig, and over there the primary product is going to be the fig. And so if you had it where both Mishnahs had the same kind of tree, you wouldn't be able to make that link between these two disputes. In other words, you need this to be the balsam tree. You need that over there to be a fig tree. That's the precision and cleverness of what Rebbe did. And that's really the amazing thing that Rebbe did with Ruach HaKodesh to bring up this difference, because this has the balsam, and the balsam is what you want it for. You want the sap. You don't want any other part of it. You don't care about balsam shoots, right? You care about the sap. That's why you put any effort in at all. This is the only way that you can understand that this dispute is not linked. And this is the only way you can understand that there's a difference here in the halacha between over there and over here, okay? Now, the law of Sheviis is not going to be similar to the law of Orlah, and we're going to get into that. So the Gemara is going to say Sheviis sanctity takes effect on animal food as well as human food, and Orlah sanctity does not take effect on animal foods, but only on the fruits, which are going to be human foods. So the idea is that, yes, okay, over there in Orlah, Rabbi Yeshua is going to exclude tree sap from the law of Orlah because it's not a fruit. Okay, but he would also concede that it is going to be included in the law of Sheviis, right? So we covered this before in Sheviis, right? You have to look at the plant as a whole, and there can be parts of the plant that can have different uses. And so, if the entire part of the plant, even with different parts, the different parts itself can have different halachic statuses. For instance, in this Mishnah here, we're talking about the pistachio with the shoots and the leaves, right? The shoots are going to be subject to Beur, and the leaves are not. But both are going to have Sheviis sanctity. So over here, you can have a case where the sap itself can be taken from this fig tree, and you can also take the fruits as well. Both would be subject to Sheviis. If you're going to have a use for the sap, I don't know why, but you want to use it to curdle cheese and make it cheese out of it, that's fine. So now this is going to have Sheviis sanctity. But over there, this cheese is not going to have Orlah sanctity, okay? So that's a difference right there between this Mishnah and that Mishnah. And that's also going to be a difference between why we need this Mishnah to specifically not be a fig tree. It has to be the balsam tree, because you wouldn't be able to make this link. You wouldn't be able to get the distinction. And what would happen is you would look at it and you'd say, oh, wait a second. Maybe the laws of Orlah and Sheviis are actually quite similar. If I already study the Gemara in Orlah, I don't need to worry about the Gemara in Sheviis. But that's not true. When you see that this is going to be the case for Sheviis sanctity for the balsam, you're going to say, wait a second, the sap can have Sheviis sanctity. And so over there, the fruit is the one that has Orlah sanctity, but not the sap. But over here, the sap has Sheviis sanctity. So that's another difference. Now, we're going to talk about another difference related to Rabbi Yeshua's ruling with Orlah. And Rabbi Avin says, you have yet another factor, another difference, which indicates that Rabbi Shimon's ruling is not linked to Rabbi Yeshua. In other words, that there are differences here, and we're going to cover this, and then we're going to finish up. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua stated his ruling that wood sap is not treated as a fruit regarding Orlah, and that's going to be as a tradition from his teachers, says this Gemara. Whereas Rabbi Shimon stated his ruling that balsam sap has no Sheviis sanctity in his own name. So the idea is that if Rabbi Shimon's ruling was based on that of Rabbi Yeshua, he would have cited it as a tradition. But the point is that this Mishnah is different than that Mishnah over there. And over here, we're not seeing that he's citing it as a tradition. And so we're seeing that this is also going to be an unrelated ruling with Rabbi Yeshua. Now, keep in mind, the halacha is going to go by the Tana Kama. The Tana Kama say to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the halacha is not like you. And basically, the Tana Kama's point is that this sap of the tree does have Sheviis sanctity. Because, again, they would say this is a primary product, and because you're extracting it on Sheviis, you would say that this is going to be subject to the laws of Sheviis. So the Gemara that was talking about Rabbi Yeshua's statement in the Mishnah in Orla, that the sap of the wood or the leaves itself that you're getting the sap from, that it's not going to be prohibited as Orla. But over there, if you're taking these unripe figs and it has sap to it, and you're putting it in to the to make this cheese and curdle it, you're not going to be allowed to have the cheese because it's going to be considered as fruit. And they're going to get into the mechanism on why is it that this is going to be considered fruit, because you'd say, oh, wait a second, but these figs are unripe, so how do you say that this is fruit? And the Gemara says, what is the meaning of Rabbi Yeshua's statement? Does it mean that the sap of unripe figs is itself considered a fruit, or that the unripe figs are considered fruit? So the idea is that, well, maybe Rabbi Yeshua does not mean that the fruit sap of the Orla is considered fruit. Rather, it's just the product of the prohibited Orla fruit, and that's going to be the reason why it's prohibited. So trying to figure out, okay, we're agreeing that the sap of the leaves and the sap of the Orla tree, that's going to be something else. Really, you want the fruit, that's the primary product. So the question is, why is it that this unripe fruit is going to be a problem? And it's going to get into some of the ramifications of this question, right? So really, again, this is the question that's being asked. Is unripe fig a fruit, right? It's unripe. Now, part of the product of this fig is going to be the sap that curdles it. But you'd say, but it's unripe. It's not even edible yet. How can it be a fruit? So that's also going to be the amazing insight of Orla over there, is going to be like, well, wait a second. We're not talking about ripe fruit. We're talking about fruit that's inedible. That's what's going to make it curdle, and that's what's going to make it considered as fruit. That's what is so amazing about the Mishnah over there in Orla. So here's some of the practical ramifications of this question. The question again, is unripe figs really considered a fruit? And the Gemara says, if you say that fruit sap is considered a fruit in its own right, then if one does so, where he's going to curdle the milk, with the sap of unripe figs of truma, the cheese should be prohibited to a non-kohen in accordance with the laws of truma. But if you say that unripe figs are fruits and their sap is not classified as a fruit, but just as a product of the fruit, then if one does curdle the milk with the sap of the unripe figs of truma, the cheese would be allowed to a non-kohen. So that's really going to be the question, okay? In other words, you would say that if it's the fruit sap itself, and you're saying it's not the fruit, then you'd say the sap of the truma fruit is not considered truma at all. And so then you would say that this cheese that comes about with it, that's not going to be truma. And you would say the opposite. You'd say, well, if the fruit sap that comes out of the fruit is going to be like a fruit, and then you're going to try to take these truma figs and you're going to go to curdle this milk and turn it into a cheese, then you basically say that, you have fruit inside of there, and that's going to make it, this cheese basically is going to be truma. It's going to have all the laws of truma with it. And one of the laws of truma is a kohen is not allowed to eat it. So the Gemara is going to continue. It's going to say, and according to this other approach, why should this curdled cheese with a truma sap be treated more leniently than cheese curdled with orla sap? In other words, Rabbi Yeshua is ruling that if someone curdles milk with the sap of orlah fruit, this cheese is prohibited because it has orlah sanctity. And so you're basically saying, well, wait a second. If you're taking this fruit sap and, it's not going to be classified as fruit by itself, and you're just taking the sap of this truma fig and, and you're saying, well, it's not going to be considered truma, then you would also have to say the sap of the orlah fruit is not going to be considered orlah. So the real question, says the Mara Fulda, is why is it that when you have the cheese that gets curdled with the sap of the orlah fruit, that it gets the sanctity and it gets prohibited, but over here, where you have cheese that gets curdled with the sap of truma fruit, it would be permitted. So what's going to be the difference where you're taking this unripe fruit and you're putting it in to curdle the milk? What's going to be the difference between the laws of truma and the laws of orlah now? So it's really going and exploring this with some depth. It's really brilliant. The Gemara says, it is because benefiting from truma is permitted, whereas benefiting from orlah is prohibited. And that is the deep point. In other words, and by the way, this inquiry stands. This is the final word on it. So basically the idea is that, if you have it where sap is not considered a fruit, someone who goes and uses the sap to curdle the milk has derived benefit from the original fruit. And orlah, you're not allowed to have any benefit at all. So if you took this unripe fruit, okay, that's the magic of this Mishnah. You took the unripe fruit and the sap came out of it, okay, and you're getting benefit because you want this cheese, right? You want it to curdle, okay, and the orlah sap itself comes and curdles it, right? You can't even eat the fig, right? You can't even eat this orlah fig. You'd say it's not even ripe. It's not even fruit yet. It doesn't have the status of fruit. And the idea here is they're saying, look, the difference here with orlah is that orlah is prohibited for all benefit. So if you're taking the orlah sap, it's also going to be prohibited. Truma is different, okay? The only person who can't eat it is a non-Kohen. A Kohen is allowed to benefit from it. So if you're going to consider the sap of truma figs or a truma fruit to not be a fruit, then the cheese that's curdled with it is going to be permitted. So that's going to be a deep idea over there. Now, the Chazan Ish is going to explain it a little differently, okay? And the Chazan Ish is basically going to be interpreting it like this. He's going to say, since you have the orlah prohibition, and that's going to be more stringent than the truma prohibition, and why is it? Because, truma, it's just a non-Kohen can't eat it. In the case of orlah, whether you're a Kohen, a Levi, or a Yisrael, you can't get any benefit from it, okay? So that's more strict. And what the Chazan Ish points out in his commentary over in his Beur 14.8, he's saying that the rabbis imposed a decree against curdling with the sap of the orlah fruit, but not against curdling with the sap of a truma fruit. So that gives us some of the depth of why the Mishnah over there in orlah is dealing with the orlah fruit that's unripe. Okay, that's really the nuance over there, and that's really what's so deep about it. Now, the Mishnah is going to move on to the next subject, and it's going to talk about a new rose that's subject to Beur, and it was soaked in an old oil that's not subject to Beur. So again, you have this 7th-year rose. They're going to make perfume out of it, or they're going to make an oil that's going to smell really nice. By the way, they do use rose oil in salads in Persian cooking. And then they are going to take a 6th-year oil, and they're going to do it. Now, the question over there in the Mishnah, and over here in the Mishnah, is going to talk about someone who takes out this rose and he eats it before the Beur deadline, and the oil is going to be allowed. Now, the case is going to be opposite. in the following. If you have an old rose, that's going to be one from the 6th year. It's going to be soaked in new oil. This is going to be 7th year oil. Then it is going to be subject to Beur. So I want to just clarify this a little bit. So basically, if somebody's taking a 7th year rose, this, by the way, is going to be new. It's going to be considered new. And when it's talking about the 6th year oil in the terms of the Gemara here, it's going to be considered the old one. That's going to be the 6th year one. That's going to be the 6th year oil. So over here, the 6th year oil is 6th year oil, right? There's no Beur for it. It's only the 7th year product that's subject to Beur. So if you went and you soaked the opposite way, where you took a 6th year rose, okay, this is going to be old, right? And you put it into the 7th year oil, all right, the 6th year rose is going to become subject to Beur. And the reason for this is going to be that the rose absorbed some of the flavor of the Sheviis oil in which it was soaked. So now the idea is that the oil is going to also absorb some of the flavor of the rose. And accordingly, the question is going to be, what is the distinction between these two cases? And this is going to follow up. This is going to end this halacha. So the Gemara says. So again, we want to know what's the difference between you take the 6th year oil, you put a 7th year rose in it, and you eat the rose on the 7th year. And what's the difference? It has the opposite ruling, where you're going to take a 6th year rose, you're going to put it into 7th year. You're going to put it into 7th year oil, and that's going to make it subject to Beur. But over there, in the earlier case, it was not subject to Beur. What's the difference? The Gemara says, here in the first case, where a new rose was soaked in old oil, you say that he plucks out the rose, and the oil is not subject to Beur, even though it must have absorbed flavor of the Beur obligated rose. Whereas here in the later case, where an old rose is subject or is soaked in new oil, you say that the rose is subject to Beur because it absorbed the flavor of the Beur obligated oil. So what is the basis for distinguishing between these two cases? What's the difference? In other words, it says the Mara Fulda says, if something that absorbed the flavor of a Beur obligated item becomes subject to Beur, then in the Mishnah's first case, we should also impose a Beur restriction on the oil. And if something that absorbed the flavor of a Beur obligated item is exempt from Beur, then the Mishnah's later case should be that we also exempt that rose from Beur. So what's going to be the difference? What's the basis for even creating any kind of distinction between these cases at all? The Gemara is going to answer it because we're going to get a good answer from Rabbi Abahu. Rabbi Abahu, who says in the name of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan, I put the name of the teacher in there. That's just so you know that that's his teacher. The two rulings are the opposing opinions of the two Tanaim. In other words, the first ruling was authored by one Tana, and the second by a different Tana, and these rulings are in fact incompatible. So this is why, by the way, my own note is this is why you can't come along and make rulings and paskin off of the Mishnah. You can't do that, because what Rabbi Abahu is pointing out is that this Mishnah is only talking about, it's not talking about a halacha. This is just talking about, there was these three opinions that we were talking about, these three baraisas. This is just talking about two of the baraisas. This is just talking about two of the opinions. And they're not reconcilable. And so don't read this Mishnah as a case of, oh, I can use this to go paskin off of. No, he's saying that these are the two opposing opinions and that they're not compatible. That's the idea. And that's why you have to really have the tradition and why you have to study Gemara and the commentary of the Gemara on the Mishnah, because that, in fact, is not the halacha. This is just shorthand for the people who are in the know to know that, when you read this part of the Mishnah is talking about this opinion of the Tana, and that part is talking about the other opinion of the other Tana, and they're not reconcilable. Okay, they're two very distinct opinions, and we covered that, right? We're covering this idea of taste. We're covering, does taste have substance? And as you can see, now that you look at, the new rose and the old oil, or the old oil and the new rose, and this is basically covering that. Is taste going to have substance or not? That's really what it's saying. Don't read this as, oh, this is different halachas. Don't read it that way. This is really shorthand for these two contradicting, incompatible Tanaic opinions. So that's how Rabbi Abahu reads it. Rabbi Zera, also a student of Rabbi Yochanan, is going to read it differently. And Rabbi Zera says that they can be reconciled, and he's gonna propose the following. He's going to say, I can interpret these two cases regarding roses in accordance with one Tana by applying two interpretations of the term old and new to the two cases as follows. When the Mishnah states a new rose soaked in old oil, it refers to a rose of the 7th year that was soaked in the oil of the 6th year. And the idea is that regarding this case, the Mishnah's ruling that the rose need merely be removed and the oil is not subject to Beur. In other words, so let me explain this in a second. And then the next point by Rabbi Zera is, it says, but if an old rose was soaked in new oil, it refers to a rose of the 7th year that was soaked in the oil of the 8th year. Now, in this second case, this Mishnah is going to rule that the oil does become subject to Beur. So basically, what's happening here is that Rabbi Zera is reading into this clause in a special way. He's saying, yeah, you could understand it before as referring to a 6th year rose and 7th year oil, but Rabbi Zera is explaining it where he's saying the 7th year oil, the 7th year rose in 8th year oil, right? So now you're talking about, we were talking about a case where we were looking before Sheviis. This is going to be 6th year and 7th year. And now basically this is turning into 7th year and 8th year, okay? And so some of the halachas are a little bit different when you're looking about things in the 7th year and 8th year. Some of the halachas are a little bit different when you talk about things in the 6th year and 7th year. A little bit of subtlety there. So what Rabbi Zera is saying is that both clauses in the Mishnah are referring to a rose of Sheviis that's soaked in non-Sheviis oil, okay? That's how he's reading it. And he's saying that the difference is whether the oil is going to be 6th year and old, or it's going to be 8th year and new. And when you have a Sheviis rose that's soaked in old 6th year oil, the oil remains exempt from Beur. Why? Because the oil was exempt from Beur. All you have to do is take out the rose and it's subject to Beur. It's not subject to Beur. It's exempt from Beur. But according to how the Mara Fulda is going to read it, he's going to say, on Rabbi Zera's argument, when it is soaked in a new 8th year oil, the oil is going to become subject to Beur. So, why is it that, the 6th year oil is going to be different from the 8th year oil? And the Rambam commentary in the Mishnah is actually going to explain it. He's going to say that the old oil is resistant to absorbing flavor unless something is soaked for a very, very long time, and the fresh oil is able to absorb the flavor immediately. So the idea, according to the Rambam, is that if you have this fresh rose, it's not going to impart its flavor as quickly as an old rose. And so when a Sheviis rose is soaked in 6th year oil, such that you have the rose where the rose is new and the oil is old, the rose is not really going to impart flavor into the oil as quickly. And the Mishnah is really ruling, according to this reading of Rabbi Zera, that the oil stays exempt from Beur unless it gets soaked for a very long period of time. And the Rambam explains, on the other hand, when you have a Sheviis rose soaked in 8th year oil, such that the rose is old and the oil is new, the rose is going to impart the flavor into the oil immediately. And basically, this is saying that the oil is going to become subject to Beur because the flavor of the rose gets absorbed into the oil. And basically, Rabbi Zera is holding the opinion over here where, hey, the flavor does become like substance. And over here, the oil has absorbed the qualities of the rose, and now the oil becomes subject to Beur. So this, in fact, ends up being Rabbi Yeshua's opinion. So have a great day. And, one of the most important things you can do when studying Gemara is trying to get at the details or contradictions or differences, or when things appear to be similar, trying to get the nuances for why the Mishnah is the way it is. Because the Mishnah is one of the most precise things in the entire universe. It is so precisely calibrated, and it came down to the Ruach HaKodesh, and it's something that we have to pay special attention to when we learn Gemara. Have a great day.